Hello everyone, this is Andy from GamesRound. I'm super sorry for this technical issue. We've got issues on Jeremy's side. Jeremy's joining in a bit. He has to figure out how to join this Restream app. So please hold on with us. We will be live soon when we solve those technical issues. Sorry for that again. guys, hello, hello. Luckily we're back, and luckily everything is fine. Jeremy, hey Jeremy, how it's going? Jeremy, can you hear me? Okay?
All right, testing, testing. Can
Yeah,
you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay?
Excellent. Yes. Finally. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. That happens sometimes. So luckily we have you back because I definitely didn't want to cancel anything because I know what great job you've done with putting together your knowledge in a deck, which people are about to see today. So
Yep.
hey guys, let me introduce Jeremy first. Um, Jeremy is currently game design director at Funplus in Stockholm with more than 12 years of experience. And he last worked on Candy Crush Friends Saga at King as a lead game designer. He has experience spanning in different areas from game design and in AAA to indie titles to designing mobile free-to-play games at companies like Konami, King, and obviously FunPlus, both Asian and Western markets. And we're extremely lucky to have Jeremy here today with us. So please kind of welcome me, join me in welcoming Jeremy. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, amazing. So before we jump to our presentation today, so let me share with you what's going to happen today. So basically, I will have a quick intro about Games Round, really quick. After that, I will hand the microphone to Jeremy, and you guys have an opportunity to ask questions. Please use web chat, YouTube chat, Facebook, Instagram, every every single place where we're streaming right now to ask questions to Jeremy because this is the goal of the whole thing is to help educate developers who registered on Games Round how to deliver best games. Because you know, the goal of Games Round is to connect great teams with publishers and investors. This is what we do. And I hear a lot of questions. All right, can you help us with this and that? Can you help us with how to make our best game? So this is how we're helping you. We're bringing top talents from the market, industry professionals to share the industry knowledge with you. So, all right. Long story short, I give it all to you, Jeremy. So yeah, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you, Andre. Let me just see if I can share the screen. All right. Do you guys see the window?
Now, yes.
The presentation is on, right?
Oh, wait a minute. Yes, now the presentation is on. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so hello again. My name is Jeremy. I'm currently a game design director at FunPlus Stockholm. And a little bit about me. So that's me in the middle. And I'm originally from Singapore. And in 2014, I moved to Berlin and joined King in the Berlin studio. And in 2017, I moved again up to Stockholm. I just keep moving further and further up north, away from the heat. I'm not sure why. Mm, I've worked in companies like Konami, like Andre mentioned, King in Berlin, and then in Stockholm. And recently, like last year, I just joined FunPlus as a game design director. The first game that I played and I fell in love with that sort of like kickstart my career was the original Super Mario Brothers on NES. I was 6 at the time, and I only had like 2 or 3 games. And I remember just like Mario was the game that I played the most, and I think I probably destroyed every block in Super Mario Brothers, and found every secret. And my favorite franchise of all time is Zelda, particularly like this one, which is Zelda: Ocarina of Time. That's my favorite game of all time. The proudest moment in my career so far was this. In 2018, we launched Candy Crush Friends, and I was fortunate enough to be at the launch party. So what we did was that we actually had a super big launch party in Manhattan, New York, and we projected like Friends onto one of like the big skyscrapers. And in doing so, we actually broke a Guinness World Record for biggest game projection ever. Yeah, so literally the biggest game. So yeah, like that experience was awesome, and yeah, it's something that I really remember a lot. All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about casual games. Like since 2014, for the last 6 years, I've been mostly doing casual. And when I first got into casual, personally, I'm a console and I'm a core gamer, and casual was really new for me. So what I did was that I I got inspired from method acting, like Daniel Day-Lewis. Like he's a famous method actor, right? Which is method acting is a technique of acting in which an actor aspires to complete emotional identification with a part. What does that mean? So for me as a game designer, what I did was that as a core gamer, what I did was that I tried to put myself into the shoes of a casual gamer. And I think it was for 1 month. That was around the launch of Candy Crush Soda, where I didn't play anything other than Candy Crush Soda. So I try to imagine myself as, okay, if I am a casual gamer and the only game I have is Candy Crush Soda, how would I interact with that game? How would I interact with games in general? And that's when I came up with try to answer a few questions about casual gamers, like what, who, how, why, when, and where do they play games? Mm, the basis of it is like the start of it is what is a casual game, and in general, like if you ask players like what a casual game is, they'll tell you different things, right? But it comes down to a few things: games that are quick to play, so something that is quick to play, easy to learn, games that you can play in short bursts, games where you can complete levels quickly, or games where they provide me with a challenge. And this last point is particularly interesting because when you think about casual games, you think it's easy, and this is not particularly true. If you ask a lot of Candy Crush players, they're actually pretty hardcore and they like to be challenged. The the main thing is that once they learn something, the challenge should scale according to their learning. And I think this is something that when you approach casual games, something that you should think about. The typical casual gamer is probably female, somewhere around like 35 years or older. But this audience is growing over the years. As you can see, like there are more males getting in to play games for competition, for example. Older audiences are coming in to challenge themselves. And younger players are playing more games, even casual games, to connect with one another, to have something to talk about, to be able to play with one another. In a traditional sense, though, like why do casual players play is that they play for three main reasons. They play to look for entertainment in their daily lives, they play to be able to pass time, and they play to relax and unwind after a long day. One thing when I was in this method acting study of trying to engage games like a casual player was trying to play how they would play, which is um, everywhere, basically, like on the train, waiting for a bus, like looking after a kid, for example, or talking to my friends. I'll be swiping Candy Crush. So that was how, and that is normally how casual players tend to engage with the games. When do they play? They tend to play like a few sessions a day. The average candy player, the average casual player plays around 10 to 15 rounds of match 3 games a day. Like, and quite normally it's probably on the morning commute to work, a few rounds around lunchtime, on the evening commute back from work, and a few rounds before they sleep. That's the normal play habits of a casual player. When designing for casual, that's how I came up. I thought about these numbers, right? Casual games are normally designed in like 3 minute game loops. Like a game round is pretty quick, within 3 to 5 minutes. Normally, you see that a game session it's like 30 minutes. So an example of that is like it takes around 25 to 30 minutes to go through 5 lives in Candy Crush, and that is time around a 30-minute game session. Things that you should be thinking about is a 24-hour retention. What that means is that is there something for your player to come back when they wake up the next day? Like, what is the main reason for them to come back? Is it a level they need to finish? Is it a reward that is waiting for them? Like, think about these kind of things. And also good to think about is where would they be in the game in 7 days or 14 days or 28 days after starting the game. Think about the general progression. Like, players like to play to pass time, but they also want to be able to sense progression, to be able to know that they are spending their time and they're getting something in return in terms of progression. The difference between designing for core and casual is like core games, when you design for them or when you engage with a core game, it's very often you're in front of a couch. It's a very dedicated kind of like game experience, that you have like 60 to 90 minutes and the player is fully engaged. In casual, it's totally opposite, where the player can put down the game anytime. They could be interrupted at any point. It has to be easy for them to be able to know where to resume, what's going on. And the way that I think about it as a designer is very much around designing for negative space. So, for example, like in this image, the black area where you see like the cup, that's probably like when you design for a core game, and the negative space, which is the white area, when you think about it, like around it, is designing for casual, which is something that the players can easily pick up and play with pockets of time. One thing that I learned was cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. And casual games are normally designed with pretty low cognitive load. What that means is that it should be easy to pick up and play, where they can get interrupted and they should be able to resume from where they put the game down. And the objective should be clear. For example, in a match 3 game, you always know just by looking at the screen, even if you come back an hour later, like what is your next move. Ultimately, when designing for casual, it's about keeping it simple. Design needs to be simply understood and can reach as many people as possible. Something that someone told me when designing for casual it goes something like this: that it has to make sense. Like, the moment something doesn't make sense for core gamers, it's quite often that we accept rules like, okay, like this does this damage to this unit. Okay, I understand that. For core gamers, we kind of can get behind it, if we just understanding is the rules of the game. For casual games, it's very often that it needs to be something that they can relate to or something they can understand. So it's quite important to keep the general design intention or the general idea pretty simple. All right, so that's a very quick introduction to the casual players, and the next part of my presentation will be very much focused around my personal design processes and practices in creating new casual games. Like, if I, as a game designer, were to try to create a new casual game, how would I personally approach this? And then this part of the presentation would mostly cover that. But before that, any questions or any comments on the up to this point?
Yeah, I'm reading the questions right now. So, what's expected from a game demo when reaching out to investors to fund the rest of the game?
Yep.
Which aspects should be final aside from the gameplay loop, such as
Yep.
animation, sound system, UI, etc.? I'm
Yep.
not sure if it directly relates to what you've just told us, but
Yep.
as long as it's something from the chat, probably you could pick that up.
Yep. I think I'll cover some of it in the next part of the presentation. And if like you need more details, like feel free to ask some more.
Okay, sounds good. Then I
Yep.
guess we can continue.
All right. So, all right. Is it back in presentation mode?
Yes, yes.
All right. Excellent. So, the place that I like to start is like there's a book called Start with Why, and I'm quite inspired by that. So, like for me, it's always quite important to define the why. Like, ask yourself as a game designer when you're creating a new game, like, why will players play your game? Of all the games in the App Store, and which is a lot today, right? Like, is what is the need, or what is the gap that your game is currently filling? And it's a pretty big question. So like there are a lot of places to start, right? So I think for me, like normally where I try to start is somewhere around looking at player motivations, right? So coming back to the original question of does the player want to play a game or my game, right? What's the main purpose that my game is serving? So, for example, is it to entertain players? Is it mostly uh, a way to pass time? Is it because like they want to relax? Is it something in my game that makes them feel excited? Is there something that allows them to escape to a different role, a different character, a different world? Is it because it's challenge? Does it give them a sense of achievement? Is there something that they can compete with somebody else? Is there something in the game that allows them to establish a routine? Or is there like a game that has social interactions, for example? And I think starting from motivations, you can start to distill that down into genres. Like for example, if it's mostly the pastime, maybe the game would be an idle game. If it's to relax, maybe it's something like a Zen gardening kind of game. If it's exciting, maybe it's an action game. If it's for escapism, like maybe it's narrative heavy, maybe it's something about story. Challenge, maybe it's a roguelike, like Archer, for example. Um, for competition, like maybe it's player versus player games, like the new, or maybe it's a battle royale game where you can compete with somebody else or compete with hundreds of players, for example. Daily routine, maybe it's a sim game like Animal Crossing where you come in every day and you're just doing stuff to build your village and all that kind of stuff. Or social interactions, then maybe it's an MMORPG or a multiplayer game that focuses on teamwork. So the general point is that as a designer, it's always really important to start thinking about what's the main reason why this game should exist. And then if you can figure out like what the player needs, that's the general idea of where to start making a game. Mm. One thing for game designers particularly is that it's quite often that we say that the reason that we give is that because it's fun, right? And I think this is valid. And I think making a game because it's fun or because you find that it's fun, I think that's a really good start. Um, it's a really good start to start making a game that you think is fun, that you believe in, and hopefully other people will find fun as well, right? But my general prompt here is that if you can try to go a bit further than just saying because it's fun, because fun is such a difficult term to quantify, right? Start asking yourself, why is it fun? Like, who is it fun for? Like, what is it in the game that actually makes it fun, right? So it's quite important that it's fun, but you're also able to articulate like the whole reason why it's fun to you, and why it'll be fun for somebody else. The second step is like after you more or less like find a ballpark of like a motivation or a need to fill would be to try to identify opportunities, right? So what is out there and where do you come in? This is a pretty good time to normally do a competitor analysis or a market survey. There are a few ways to do this. Like I think it's you can go to Game Refinery or App Annie or Sensor Tower and just pull out like a chart on like the genre that you're looking for. So for example, like if I were to make a new match 3 game, I would go to App Annie and I'll pull out a chart, right, and say, okay, these are the top 15 grossing games in the US in the last year, for example, right? And looking at the chart itself or looking at the list itself, I think that's a good start, but it's quite important as well that you're able to identify trends or like trends and gaps for you to come in, right? So an example of this is like if I look at, okay, these are the top 15 games in the US, and I look at like I plot them on the timeline, games released from 2012 all the way up to 2020. Something that I would discover, for example, is that recent match 3 games, like the ones that make the top 15, like they all brought something new to the genre. Like Friends, Toon Blast, Homescapes or Gardenscapes, and Best Fiends, they all brought something new. And I would argue that probably maybe the newness is what allows them to have the identity to set themselves apart so that they can actually become successful, right? Um, Spotting that, and then I'll probably go a step further of identifying like opportunities in the market. Like, so one thing I like to do is that I like to try to find, for example, if I create, this is an example of like if I were to create a new match 3 game, right? I put it on a scale of like simple to complex. Simple games means normally greater reach. It's easy to understand, everybody can play. But the monetization in this case probably wouldn't be like super strong. And then on the far right side, you see something that's more complex, where it would have deeper monetization, and probably not as much reach. So if I think about this, right, and I think about, okay, so Candy Crush is right in the middle. Candy Crush is the standard match 3. It's what people are used to. It's really famous, and millions of players who play it. Um, but where do we go from there, right? So we can go, and if you look at this chart, you can see that you can go either way from there, right? You can go towards the left. The extreme left of simple is probably something like a slot machine, like Zynga slots or Slot Mania. It was just one button, right? One button, you get results. And then there's a match, right? So that is a super simple version of a match three mechanic, for example. A more extended version of that is probably something like the second example, Coin Master, where you have a slot mechanic and then you put it on top of a meta game with progression, with village building, with pets, and all that kind of stuff, right? But probably you don't go that far. And I think if you don't go that far, you'll see an example like Toy Blast and Toon Blast, which simplifies the matching or the switching mechanic to become what we call clickers. And it's a tap two rather than a match three, where you tap when you match two or more of the same color. So that's moving to the left of making Candy Crush simpler, for example. Then you would probably go for something like Toon Blast. If you go for something to the right, and you start asking yourself the question of like, okay, what else do Candy Crush players want? Maybe they want story, maybe they want narrative, right? And I think that's where the opportunity for something like Gardenscapes or Homescapes comes in, where you think, okay, there's match three, you play that to pass time, but at the same time, you also want to see some sort of building or some sort of progression or some sort of story that's happening in front of your eyes. And that adds a bit more complexity to the game, but it does add a lot of value for the players who are playing the game in the long run. And if you think about it, like even further down, like, okay, what more can we do that's making it even more complex? So maybe something like Best Fiends, where it's a match game, it's a linker, but you're also managing a team of characters with different powers, with a character collection kind of meta, right? Or even further than that, something pretty hardcore like Empires and Puzzles, where it's the team collection kind of like metagame, but with a puzzle battle kind of mechanic. It still uses match. So the thing about this scale is that it's probably a scale of like things that uses match mechanics, but where you can take it. And the example here is like, if you're going to start a new game, for example, resource management or runners, for example, a good exercise would be to do something like this, which would be take the market leaders, put them in some sort of scale that makes sense to you, and then try to identify opportunities that you can come in. All right. One thing in the market today is like it's super crowded. So to truly stand out, you need to focus on a few key innovation areas. Like, for example, if I'm doing match 3 again, like it's important to identify the core components of what makes a match 3 game and choose which areas to focus on innovating. So a match 3 game is normally made up of a few core areas. There's the core gameplay, there is what we call the meta game, which is your progression, systems, and your monetization and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the technology, right? Like in 2012, when Candy Crush was created, it innovated on all fronts actually. What it brought new to the core gameplay was that it brought a power-up combo system where you could create power-ups by doing matches, and then you could combine them to make even more powerful combos. That was new for its time, and something that a game before that, for example, Bejeweled didn't have. It also innovated on the meta area, where it brought what we call in King as the Saga envelope. The reason why it's called an envelope is because it's like a wrapper to your core gameplay. So your core gameplay is about matching, but your envelope or the progression system is around moving from one level to the next, right? And again, back in 2011, 2012, when people were playing Match, were playing Bejeweled, like it was kind of unheard of to have a game with like 65 levels and then 1,000 levels, right? And now today is like 5,000 levels. So that was new for its time as well. And from the technology side, it also innovated where this was the time when most people were picking up smartphones, but they were still playing games on PC. So one thing that Candy Crush did on the technology front was to have to be able to resume playing between web and mobile. You could go on Facebook, you could play the game, and then you can go on mobile and resume exactly from where you were. This was a new technology for its time, and it made a lot of sense to the casual players because it was just so seamless for them. So in the case of Candy Crush, like even though it's quite often that everybody says that it's a ripoff or like that it's just another match three game, like when it was released in 2012, there was a lot of innovation that was brought to the table, and more importantly, it was innovation that the audience understood or that brought value to the audience. The combo part was a little bit hard to learn at the start, but it's something that once they learned it, they actually enjoyed it, right? And playing levels, the level progression has been around forever, right? Even in the first game that I played, like the Super Mario Brothers, it has you're moving from level to level. But for the Bejeweled crowd, like suddenly going to the game where you have like 60 levels to clear, that was pretty new for them, right? And of course, the technology, like I mentioned, yeah, that was they didn't need to understand how it worked. It just worked for them, right? For casual players, and I think that's the key to it, and that was a lot of the key to the success that Candy Crush saw in 2012. But not all innovation has to be radical or has to be so disruptive, right? I would classify Candy Crush as probably like a disruptive kind of innovation, something up here. If you think about innovation on the chart, where it has impact on market, low to high, and then technology newness, low to high, right? Candy Crush is probably somewhere in the green area where it brought some new technology, it brought some new business models, and it disrupted the existing market. It brought to the App Store like the validation that free to play could work and it could work for a casual audience. And this was the time that before that the biggest game before Candy Crush was probably like Angry Birds or something, right? Which is a paid app. So Candy Crush in its time was disruptive. But when you're looking at innovation, it doesn't always have to be disruptive because disruptive innovation sometimes two things. One thing is that normally it's really expensive. Secondly, it's really risky, right? So it really depends on your focus and your team size and your capabilities. It's okay to do, for example, like something incremental, maybe just taking something that's not really famous but making it really good, and just focus on incremental innovation instead of like always going for disruptive ones. But the main thing here is that you need to have something that's different. You need to have some sort of innovation in your game, in your product, that's going to make it stand out. Coming back to the Meshi genre, like if you think about the successful games that came out after Candy Crush, like I said, not all of them were equally disruptive, but they all brought something new to the table, right? Like Best Fiends brought light puzzle battle, linker mechanics, and light character collection. Gardenscapes in 2016 brought match 3 with narrative and decoration meta. Toon Blast in 2017 brought clicker mechanics with the guild feature. And for Friends, when we worked on it, we were focused on bringing simplified character collection and costumes and character helpers in a match 3 game. So the key takeaway here is when you're doing a game, identify what need you want to fill, and then really think hard about which area you're gonna innovate on. It doesn't always have to be super big, but it should be something that you are able to focus your strengths on. A way to think about it is something like this. If I do a match 3 game, it would normally come with 3 considerations from design. I need to have polished gameplay. The switcher has to be best in class. People come in for match 3 games because they want to come and match stuff. So gameplay is king, and they come in for puzzle first. But what keeps them in the game is having an engaging meta. So I was thinking about the theme, for example. What is it? Is it decoration theme? Is it the journey to be a film director, or is it like just going through a candy world, for example? And these things that are taken for granted, they need to be improved on. So you need to know what the foundations are and improve on this. But the main focus should be on this, where there should be 1 or 2 unique features in the game that's enough to sell your game, and really be able to innovate on. So innovate on this and focus on this. Like a good model or a good exercise to do somewhere around this point is a model that Zynga uses. It's called proven, better, new. So if you have a game, you can think about, okay, what in your game is taking proven concepts, right, that some other games have done. So put that in the proven column, right? And then think about what's in your game that you're doing better than anybody else. So that goes into the better column. And then there should be at least 1 or 2 things that should go into the new column. The example here is a game from a game called Battle Legion, which is like an idle 100 versus 100 battle game. And the analysis in this article was what they did against Clash Royale, for example, which is some in the similar genre. So this is a really good model and a pretty good exercise to use if you're thinking about your game and what the innovation areas are. This is probably a good point once you have some sort of concept to be able to test it and to test it early. And there are a few ways to do this, right? You can do it by focus groups, you can do it by user interviews, you can do it by online surveys, you can do it by CTR, click-through tests, you can do it by mock ad pages. The main thing at this stage is that you want to be able to get some sort of initial read or feedback or reaction to the concepts before you start investing too heavily on it. The concept at this point should be able to sell your innovation quite clearly and take the feedback. I mean, not all the feedback will be quantitative or would be something that you can act on immediately, but try to filter through it to see what the players are really saying about it. And yeah, and this is a good point to start testing it. Another thing to think about at this stage is also thinking about your team. What kind of game is right for your team? And this is pretty important. When you go into this, it's quite obvious, but you should think about your team size, what your team's expertise is in, right? What kind of tools you have, what kind of resources do you have? Do you have easy outsourcing, for example, right? And most importantly is that you should think about the team's passion. Making a game is always going to be a marathon. It's never going to be a sprint. It's going to be a long journey. So it has to be something when you're making that the team has to be able to make, has to believe in, and they have to want to make as well and want to be able to make over a long period of time. Like when you start making a game, it could be 1.5 or 2 years before you launch, like before you go into hard launch. A good example of this is Supercell. Supercell is quite famous for having pretty small teams. And this shows in their design. They don't do really super content heavy game, but instead they tend to focus on player generated content or social interactions between players. So if you look at their games like Clash of Clans or Boom Beach, it's very much around like players building stuff and then invading other players, right? Where players themselves are the content creators, rather than Supercell trying to create like 1,000 different bases for you to try to invade and get resources. They do this so that their teams can build features that have big impact, while the community continues to sustain itself, and they can have small teams that are really flat and have good communication. A good case study is this game. Like this game, Heyday Pop, it came out a few months ago in soft launch from Supercell with the Heyday brand, and it's been an interesting discussion in the match 3 genre space. Like it's like in the match 3 genre is normally pretty heavy on content. That most of your top revenue comes from like your top tier players. The consumption looks a bit like this. It takes about 8 to 5 hours to create a level, but the top 1% of users can actually consume like 40 levels a day. So it's a really content heavy kind of business model. And so far, up to today, the most direct way to increase revenue is by increasing content production. So you need to give players more levels so that the top players have more things to play, and then they will give you more revenue. And these levels are normally all handcrafted. They're all unique. They all try to bring novelty and excitement. And the general team structure for making a match 3 game, a standard match 3 game, is that it has large teams with a lot of like content creators and level designers. Supercell's culture, however, is known to focus on smaller teams, right? So teams that makes big impact and autonomous choices. So what they did is that they try to play to their strengths. They try to find a small team solution to big content problems. So they do things like introduce seasons where they use levels and they refresh it. And then they have a puzzle pass where you have new content from playing the same levels like the next months, right? And they also reuse levels between seasons with tweaks and shuffling, so that when they create a level, it can be used multiple times rather than only used once. I guess the big question is like, can a structure like Supercell with smaller teams actually succeed in the match three space? And I think this is something that everybody is like in the match three space is looking out for. Like we're trying to see like, okay, like I think the game is really well made, and I think that it's super polished, and I really hope they succeed. But they are going against some of the genre standards, though. So it's really good to see like whether they have a new way of doing some of the things in a better way. Right. So that was the why, and that's a bit of the how. And then now we move on to the what. So once you go through all those, like the previous steps, you should be somewhere towards creating or having a game in mind that you want to make. And at this point, it's quite important to set a clear game direction. Where you can, so one way to do that is to have vision statements or product direction, one-liners, product statements, mission statements, key product objectives. Main thing is that the objectives should be understandable, actionable, and measurable. They need to be able to be easily communicated. An example is like in Friends. When we created Friends in 2018, we were faced with two big questions: how to grow the audience and how to grow the Candy Crush brand. The opportunity that we had was that 5 million people in the world had played Candy Crush, and how do we expose these players to a new Candy Crush game, right? Like how do we make them fall in love with Candy Crush again? So Friends was designed with like two very key or very clear product and design objectives: to re-engage returning players and to reach new ones with a more accessible and engaging game, and to give players a deeper connection to the Candy world and the characters. From the goals, you can see that like the goals are measurable and actionable. Like you can measure returning players, you can measure accessible but lower difficulty, etc. And this informed a lot of the design decisions that we made going into the game. Like to make it more accessible, we had lower difficulty. To make it more accessible, we had rewards even when you lost, so that just by playing the game you will get rewarded. And to make the characters the center of the game, we had them everywhere. Character collection, we had them in the levels, we had them in live ops, we had them in all the different places to put a focus on the characters. Well, in production, like the thing is that you're going to face a lot of points where you're not sure what the right decision is, and the best way to do this is often to just test it. So test early and test often, and when in doubt, test it. Different types of tests you can do: user tests, focus groups, usability tests, market tests, and A/B tests. Again, coming back to Candy Crush, I think the game was, if I remember correctly, the game was almost in soft launch for, was it like 9 to 12 months? And over the 9 to 12 months, we tested so many different things. We tested different level difficulties. We tested the reward frequency and what the contents of the reward should be. We even tested like new features for new progression stuff, like this feature, which had like more narrative elements. And we learned so much from those months in soft launch before we launched the game. Coming back to like what you should have for the game, I think it really depends on which stage your game is, right? So I think when you're going out, when you're doing a demo, the first thing you want to do, you want to measure is that you want to measure short-term retention. You want to measure how fun is your game, are players coming back. You also want to measure how much time players are spending in the game, like how often are players playing, what's the session length, and all that kind of stuff. But as you go further, you want to develop more things. You want to develop progression features, and that's when you start measuring things like long-term retention, like how many players are coming back after 14 days, after 28 days, after 90 days. And at some point, as with any kind of like business, you need to measure how much money you potentially can make, which is where you start to measure your monetization. So this is a whole different topic on itself, but the KPIs that you're starting to measure across the game would inform what you should build at the different stages of development. Right, and I think that's the bulk of it. So in summary, like from all the points, define the why, identify player needs and motivations, identify opportunities and market trends, focus on key innovation areas, test your concepts early, think about the team, set a clear game direction and objectives, and then test early and test often. And one more thing. game development is hard, and the road to success can be a really long one. And if at first you don't succeed, try and just keep trying. Like if you think about some of the games that have succeeded like super globally, many of them were not overnight successes. Like Candy Crush, when it was just a web game, it was never the number one on King.com, but somehow it became like the biggest match 3 game like since 2012. Puzzles and Dragons as well. Like it's a game that when they launched, they didn't have that much traffic in Japan, but they took 6 months and the game steadily grew before it became like a super big phenomenon, right? Brawl Stars and Fortnite as well. Like when they launched, they were not like instant successes, but like something along the way, like either a change or maybe it's a feature like Battle Royale for Fortnite that made it an overnight success. So the main thing here is that if you can and you still know, even when you launch the game and it doesn't succeed immediately, if you know what you can do to improve it, sometimes the success is a little bit further down the road. So don't give up. And that's when I leave you with this final slide where my a personal like saying that I like is like I think success is where opportunity meets preparation. You can't really predict the opportunity, but all you can do is to be really prepared for when it happens. And that's it for me.
All right. Hey, Jeremy, this was amazing. Thank you so much for this presentation. This is something what our audience really needed. And we've got a bunch of really good questions here, and we've got 10 minutes to answer those questions. And I will show those questions one by one. Okay?
Yep.
Um, how to design the right difficulty progression in terms of gameplay for
Mm.
casual games?
This one's a really hard one, right? Because it really depends on what kind of game you want to make. And even within casual games, there's so much difference in the genre itself. Like, I would argue that Homescapes is a lot harder than Candy Crush Friends, for example. And I think it comes back down to what kind of game you want to make and what you expect the audience wants, right? So for the people going for Homescapes or Gardenscapes, these are probably slightly more advanced match 3 players. And that's why they can deal with like a lot more like game objectives. They can probably deal with higher difficulty as well. So it comes back down to like audience fit and audience analysis. So think about what kind of game you want to make and which audience you're going for. Is it like the more advanced crowd? Is it like a new player to the genre? And then tweak your difficulty accordingly. And even so, you're going to be testing it and changing it a lot over development, I think.
Sounds good. The next question from Mohammed.
Yep.
When pitching investors, not publishers, to
Yep.
fund the development, how far along should the game demo be? And is it okay if it has not game-breaking bugs?
Hmm. So I think this is really a hard answer because it depends on what depends on the different investors and different publishers, right? Um, from most of the talks that I attend or I've heard on GDC and some of the other conferences, when we're talking about investors and not publishers, very often it's not so much about the game that you're currently making, but more about what your company vision is and what your next 3 games are, right? So in light of that, it's more important to be able to sell the main vision of your game, right? I think the game breaking bugs, sure, it doesn't make you look good, but when it comes to investors, I think it's more important where can they see the potential of what you're trying to achieve and will it be able to make money, I think. So go as far as you have to be able to clearly communicate the main selling point of your game's like key unique features.
Okay. Carol is asking, I created a match 3 game that donates 50% of net income to environmental organizations so that they
Mm.
can feel they are doing something more than just having fun.
Yep.
And the question is it a good way of giving the users a point of playing? Or do players focus on only the game and do not go beyond that?
Hmm. This is an interesting one because I think like is like from my experience, like what the this concept is very close to what we call like serious games, where it goes into something where games exist a little bit more than being games, right? And if you want to do that, it's fine. Um, but ultimately, it comes down to what the main goal of the product or the game is, right? If it is to raise like environmental awareness or to fund like environmental sustainability, for example, then sure, I think I think it's it's a very noble thing to do. Would a casual player really just care about that? I'm not too sure. Like it's probably something that they think it's good, but no, like my guess is it wouldn't be something that they actively would be seeking out. It's more like, is it fun first? Does it happen to pass time? And then if they're also contributing to the environment, sure, that's good.
Awesome. Abby is asking, portrait or landscape version, which one will perform good in mobile game market? And probably with
Hmm.
specifics to casual games.
Yep. So there's arguments for both. In the older King era, we always insisted on making all games portrait because you had to be able to play with one hand, you had to be able to play on the train and all that kind of stuff, right? But if you look at recent games like Homescapes, which is like more like landscape mode, it allows them to have bigger boards. It allows them to have like a dimension and all the kind of progression features. So for casual, I would say both are okay. Today really depends on what kind of game you want to make and what makes the yeah and what's better suited for your key features.
Awesome. Then we got some other questions from our Dory, which were posted before this presentation. I will show
Yep.
it here. In your opinion, what is the best method for UA in case of casual games with a minimum budget?
Ooh, this one is really hard. This is the holy grail, right? Like the in casual games or rather in match three, I think right now, if I had to put a realistic lens to it very much comes down to who has strongest UA or who has deepest pockets to be able to buy users. I think right now the market is so saturated that it's often like if you have the if you have the budget to buy users, that's when you would get the mass of the traffic of like inflow of like installs or users that you need. For a smaller studio, like a few things, right? Like I think like from a design perspective, I keep coming back to, is there something in your game that can make it unique? Like, and not just unique, is there something in your game that makes it social and viral, right? There's one game that I've been playing recently called The Fall Guys, which is a console game where you have like a battle royale game show kind of like game. And the game hasn't been out for very long, but it's been trending a lot, and it's not from a really big company because the whole format of like making it like a game show where like you can have like, I can't remember how many players it was at once, playing and then just falling out in a battle royale kind of format that makes it really streamable or makes it really easy for people to look at it and just laugh at it, laugh it off. Um, and that kind of like virality like really drives down your UA cost because your organic installs would be would just be driving itself.
Got it. And probably the last question from today from Nikolai. Are
Yeah.
there any main rules for balancing the game?
Ooh, this one is again, it comes down to whom the game is for and what kind of game it is. My general sense is that most of the time as a game developer, like whatever you think is easy, normally you're probably 30% to 50% higher than the difficulty curve that you should be. Yeah, because we know the game really well, right? So I think it's like whatever you have a sense for, make sure that you lower it. And the best way, honestly, is just to be able to test it. Like you test it, and then you have different difficulties out in the market. Do an A/B test and see which one has better performance.
Got it. Got it. Hey guys, I think this was our last question for today because we're out of time. Please join me in saying thank you to Jeremy Kang. Jeremy, this was an amazing, amazing presentation and a lot of insights. I see people are writing thank you in our chat.
Yep.
Yeah, you can see that. Thanks,
Yep. Thanks,
Caroline.
guys.
Thanks,
Thanks for
Nikolai.
listening.
Hey
Yep.
Oscar, I see this is our old friend of the platform GamesRound, and people are appreciating what Jeremy you are saying here. I really am grateful for having you here, and
Yep.
hope we will have some more sessions maybe like that because we've got some other things to cover, and as well, guys. please click subscribe, go to our website and register. In this case, you will receive notification emails from GamesRound that there's going to be an event, and you will be able to receive those notifications upfront and dedicate a part of your time, because you see that we are not doing small sessions. We're doing like an hour sessions. Sometimes we do prototype reviews with publishers, and it requires time commitment from you. Hopefully you liked it, based on comments you did. So thank you, and talk with you
All right.
next time.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
Jeremy.
me. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. See you guys. Bye.
Bye bye.